Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving headfirst into one of the most turbulent periods in English history, the Wars of the Roses, and specifically into one absolutely towering figure, Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick, better known, of course, as Warwick the Kingmaker. It's a name that just commands attention, doesn't it?
It really does. And our mission today is to unpack that.
Yeah.
How did one man get so powerful? We're talking about wealth, inheritance, military might.
Everything that let him essentially dominate English politics. I mean, this is the guy who had a hand in deposing two different kings, Henry VI, twice.
Twice, exactly. And then he turned on Edward IV, the very king he'd put on the throne. It's extraordinary.
It really is the central puzzle, isn't it? How could a subject, just one nobleman, get that much control over the crown itself?
That's what we're digging into. We've got sources covering land disputes, diplomacy, battles. All roads seem to lead back to Warwick.
Okay, maybe a quick snapshot first, just the basics on him.
Sure. Born 1428, died relatively young, actually only 42. Met his end at the Battle of Barnet in 1471.
And titles, he had quite a few.
Oh, yeah. 16th Earl of Warwick, 6th Earl of Salisbury, Baron Montague, Baron Monthermer, a whole string of them.
Started out Yorkist, famously.
Staunchly Yorkist. But then, later, he did that incredible political pivot and switched to the Lancastrian side.
Which tells you something about his political skill. Our sources seem to agree he was incredibly popular.
Hugely popular, yeah. Across society, from the commons up. He knew how to play the crowd, how to use popular feeling for political advantage. A real operator.
A master populist, you could say. But you mentioned the real foundation was, well, money.
Absolutely. It all comes back to the cash and the land. Okay, let's get into that then. The foundation of his power, this incredible wealth and inheritance. It seems like the Nevilles were pretty good at the marriage game even before he came along. They really were. It was almost systemic. The family had been rising for a century, fighting the Scots, gaining favor.
And Warwick's father set the stage.
Right. Richard Neville, the father, married Alice Montague. That marriage made him Earl of Salisbury, jurixoris, meaning by right of his wife. He inherited the title through her.
So they were already experts at using marriage to absorb titles and land from families without male heirs. But then Warwick himself comes along.
And he takes it to a whole new level. It wasn't just inheriting titles. He, hit the jackpot.
How so?
Well, in 1436, he was only 8 years old. He's married off to Lady Anne Beauchamp.
Okay.
This marriage positioned him to inherit not just the Montague lands via his father, but also the vast Beauchamp and Despencer estates. Huge already.
But there was more. You mentioned a jackpot.
Yeah, pure circumstance, really. Anne Beauchamp's brother, Henry Beauchamp, died young in 1446. Then his infant daughter, also named Anne, died just 3 years later, 1449.
Ah, so the direct male line.
Died out completely. And because Richard Neville, our Warwick, was married to Anne Beauchamp the Elder, he suddenly became jurixoris again, the Earl of Warwick.
Wow. So all those inheritances, Montague, Beauchamp, Despencer, they all funneled directly to him.
Pretty much. Overnight, he controls this enormous network of castles, estates, lands, stretching all across England. He becomes, without question, the wealthiest peer in the realm.
Just how wealthy are we talking? Can we put a number on it?
We can. The sources put his annual income from land alone at over £7,000.
£7,000 in the 1450s.
Yeah, pause on that. The quote is, it was far more than any other man in the realm but the king.
Okay, help translate that. £7,000 then. What does that buy you in terms of political power?
Well, think about the king. Maybe his total income on paper was £20,000, £25,000. But the crown was always broke. Wars, debts, handing out lands to favorites.
Right, always short of actual cash.
Exactly. But Warwick's income, mostly solid rents from consolidated estates. He had ready liquid cash. $7,000 a year could pay for hundreds of trained soldiers, his own private army and livery, permanently, not just temporary levies.
Wow.
He could garrison dozens of castles. He had an operational military capacity that the king himself often lacked.
So it's not just wealth, it's independent military power. That makes sense. But getting all that land so quickly must have caused problems.
Immediately, disputes broke out right away.
Specifically over Glamorgan in Wales.
That was the big one, part of the Beauchamp inheritance. It was claimed by Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset.
Why him?
He'd married a daughter from the first marriage of Richard Beauchamp, Warwick's father-in-law. So he had a claim, a rival claim.
And the king's government sided with Somerset.
They did. In June 1453, Somerset was granted custody of Glamorgan. For Warwick, this wasn't just losing some land. It felt like the king, Henry VI, was actively undermining his rightful inheritance to favor a rival.
And that was the moment he switched sides, pushed him out of the court circle.
That was the catalyst, absolutely. It pushed him directly into opposition. Which brings us neatly to the next phase, moving from a court supporter to, well, a rebel leader in the 1450s. It's a crucial pivot. Remember, he'd actually supported Henry VI initially, even against the Duke of York back in 1452.
Right.
But when the crown really Queen Margaret, because Henry VI had his first major mental breakdown around then, 1453.
The timing.
Yeah. When the Queen and the government leaned heavily on Somerset, Warwick's rival, he saw the writing on the wall. His only way forward seemed to be aligning with Richard, Duke of York.
And that's the start of his role in the Wars of the Roses proper.
Pretty much kicked it off for him.
So his first big move is the First Battle of St. Albans, 1455.
Yes. Militarily small, maybe, but politically huge. The Yorkists, including Warwick, captured King Henry.
And crucially for Warwick,
His rival, Somerset, was killed in the fighting. Problem solved. In a rather brutal way.
and Warwick gets rewarded for this victory. He gets appointed Constable of Calais in 1456. Why was Calais such a big deal?
Oh, Calais was everything. It was England's last bit of France, right? Conquered way back.
Yeah.
And it housed England's biggest, best professional standing army. Getting the captaincy of Calais gave Warwick a power base totally independent of London. Geographically separate, politically separate.
Instant military muscle. And a safe place to run to if things went wrong back home.
Exactly. A sanctuary and a launch pad.
But Queen Margaret wasn't stupid. She saw the danger of him having that power base, didn't she?
She did. She cut off his official supplies in 1457, trying to starve his Calais garrison of funds.
Big mistake. Because this is when he turns to piracy.
Spectacularly. With his funding cut, Warwick just ignored the crown completely. He started using the Calais fleet to attack foreign merchant ships. Self-funded piracy, basically.
Wait, really? He just attacked anyone?
You know, strategic targets. In 1458, his ships hit a huge chunk of the Castilian fleet wool, iron, valuable stuff. Then they went after the Hanseatic League ships, also very wealthy.
That's audacious.
Yeah.
The Earl of England funding his army by plundering international trade.
Totally brazen. Caused diplomatic incidents, naturally. London merchants weren't happy.
But
But
it worked.
it paid his soldiers in Calais, kept them loyal, and it boosted his reputation, this decisive, powerful leader taking action. Plus, while he was doing this, he was building connections on the continent.
Networking.
Talking to Charles VII of France, Philip the Good of Burgundy, building this international standing, this military reputation. No other English noble could match it.
Okay, so he's riding high, but then there's a setback. Ludford Bridge, 1459.
Right, a temporary one. The Yorkist leaders, York, Warwick, his father Salisbury, their forces kind of melted away at Ludford Bridge.
Why?
Seems many of the soldiers were still unwilling to fight King Henry in person. The king was actually there, so the Yorkist leaders had to scatter. Warwick fled, crucially, back to Calais.
With Edward, Earl of March. The future Edward IV.
Yes, the young Edward went with him. York himself fled to Ireland. Looked like a disaster for them.
But they bounced back fast. Less than a year later, they're invading.
Because Warwick still had Calais, that independent base, that army. He regrouped, got ships. Meanwhile, back in England, Queen Margaret's government was getting more unpopular.
So the timing was right again.
Perfect storm. They invade in 1460, win the Battle of Northampton, capture Henry VI again, and kill another key Lancastrian leader, the Duke of Buckingham.
Which brings us right to the peak. Making Edward V king, 1416 to 1464, but it starts with a shocker. Richard, Duke of York, trying to grab the throne himself.
Yeah, that was dramatic. York comes back from Ireland, marches into Parliament, walks up to the empty throne, and puts his hand right on it,
Just claiming it.
basically. The sources say everyone was stunned. Even Warwick might have been taken aback by how blatant it was. It was radical.
Too radical for the nobles, seems so, which led to the compromise. The Act of Accord. Explain that again. It's pretty bizarre.
It really is. Henry VI stays king for his lifetime, but his own son, Edward, Prince of Wales, is disinherited. Richard, Duke of York, is named Henry's heir.
Madness. Trying to paper over the cracks.
And it fell apart almost immediately. Queen Margaret wasn't having it. The Lancastrians fought back. Battle of Wakefield, December 1460.
A disaster for the Yorkists this time.
Huge. York himself was killed, and Warwick's father, Salisbury, captured and executed soon after.
Big losses, and Warwick himself lost a battle shortly after, didn't he? Second St. Albans.
He did. But York's son, Edward, the new Duke of York, had just won a key victory out west at Mortimer's Cross. He was young, charismatic, a capable commander.
So the momentum shifts again.
Warwick meets up with Edward. They march on London. The city is scared of the Lancastrian army. Apparently there were reports of looting.
So they welcomed the Yorkists.
They did. Edward was proclaimed King Edward IV in March 1461. The Kingmaker had made his first king.
But they still had to win the war.
Exactly. Which led to the Battle of Towton, Palm Sunday, 1461.
Infamously bloody.
One of the biggest, bloodiest battles ever fought on English soil. Massive Yorkist victory. Huge numbers of Lancastrians killed. Edward V's throne was secured, militarily at least.
And Warwick's role at Towton itself.
Actually, perhaps minor in the main battle. He'd been wounded in a skirmish the day before at Ferrybridge, but the victory was what mattered for him and Edward.
So now Warwick is really at the height of his power, isn't he?
Absolutely the apex. He's got all his lands, all his titles, resources nearly matching the king's, and Edward IV owes him. Big time.
And Edward pays up?
Oh yes, loads of rewards. Warwick keeps Calais, of course. He's made High Admiral of England, Steward of the Duchy of Lancaster. Key, powerful, lucrative posts.
And he used this moment to promote his family too, right? Create a Neville block around the king.
Very much so. His brother, John Neville, gets lands in the north, eventually becomes Earl of Northumberland in 1464. Hugely important position.
And his other brother, George.
George Neville becomes Archbishop of York in 1465, one of the top church positions. And he also serves as Chancellor, basically running the government.
So the Nevilles are everywhere, dominating the court, the north, the church, the government.
For a few years there, Warwick is effectively running the show. He negotiates truces with Scotland, with France in 1463. He pacifies the north of England, executes some 30 rebel leaders in 1464. Things seem stable.
But Edward IV, he can't have been entirely comfortable with one subject having quite that much power.
No king would be, ultimately. And Edward was young, ambitious, and wanted to be his own man. This leads us right into the breakdown, the defection. It seems to pivot around one single event, the king's secret marriage. That was the breaking point, absolutely. Remember, Warwick is acting as Edward's chief diplomat. He's deep in negotiations for a huge, prestigious marriage alliance with France.
Trying to marry Edward off to Bona of Savoy, the French king Louis XI's sister-in-law.
Exactly. A major diplomatic coup, if he pulls it off. He's staking his international reputation on it, telling the French court he has the king's backing.
And then?
Then, boom, September 1464,
Right.
Edward casually announces that, actually, he'd gotten married secretly back in May.
To Elizabeth Woodville. A commoner, relatively speaking, not royalty.
A widow, even. With children. From a family seen as minor gentry, albeit respectable Lancastrians originally, the political shockwaves were immense.
For Warwick, this must have been more than just embarrassing. It's a public humiliation on a massive scale.
Total humiliation. The sources say it caused him great offense. His diplomacy ruined. His credibility with the French court shattered. He looks like a fool. Or worse, a liar.
And for someone whose power partly rested on that international standing?
It was a devastating blow. Undermined him completely in that arena.
And Edward didn't just marry Elizabeth Woodville. He immediately started promoting her family. Aggressively.
Yeah, this wasn't just about love, if it ever was. It became about politics fast. Edward needed a power base loyal only to him, not tied to Warwick. The Woodvilles were it.
So her father, Richard Woodville.
Suddenly he's Earl Rivers. And crucially, he's made Treasurer of England. That's control over the royal finances, taken away from Warwick's sphere of influence.
Okay, so you have two camps forming at court now. Warwick and the Nevilles versus the Queen's family, the Woodvilles.
And they clash immediately over foreign policy. Warwick still wants the French alliance. The Woodvilles, possibly thinking about trade, favor an alliance with Burgundy.
France and Burgundy being bitter rivals at this point.
Exactly. And Edward sides with the Woodvilles. He secretly signs a treaty with Burgundy, while Warwick is still supposedly negotiating with France,
So he's left hanging out to dry again, forced to keep up this charade with the French.
making him look even more deceptive or powerless.
Yeah.
It was untenable.
And the slikes kept coming.
Oh yes. George Neville, Warwick's brother, gets dismissed as Chancellor. Direct hit on Neville power in government.
And then the marriage refusal. This seems critical.
Very symbolic. Warwick wanted his eldest daughter, Isabel Neville, to marry Edward's brother, George, Duke of Clarence.
A royal marriage for his daughter.
Exactly. It would tie the Nevilles even closer to the throne, maybe even put his descendants in line eventually. Edward flatly refused.
Why was that refusal such a big deal? It sent a clear message. Edward would not allow Warwick to marry into the immediate royal family. For Warwick, whose family built its power on strategic marriages, this was a fundamental rejection. It denied his ultimate ambition. So by 1467, Warwick is spending more and more time away from court.
Yes. Sulking on his estates, essentially. Rumors start flying that he's maybe, possibly, sympathetic to the Lancastrians again. He denies it, but the relationship with Edward is clearly broken.
And there's growing discontent in the country with Edward's rule anyway?
Yes, high taxes, some perceived favoritism towards the Woodvilles. Warwick sees an opportunity to exploit this.
Okay, so the resentment builds and builds until 1469. Warwick decides talking isn't working. Time for action. This is the final game, as you called it. Right. Stage 1, stir up trouble. He uses his connections in the north to spark a rebellion. Cleverly, it's led by a mysterious figure called Robin of Redesdale, probably one of his own captains, but gives Warwick deniability, using his northern power base. But the really audacious move is recruiting the king's own brother.
George, Duke of Clarence, ambitious, maybe jealous of Edward, feels overlooked. Warwick reels him in.
How? With the ultimate prize, the marriage Edward had forbidden. Warwick sails Clarence over to Calais, and there, in July 1469, Clarence marries Isabel Neville. Direct defiance of the king.
Wow. Then they invade England together. Yes. Warwick's northern rebels, under Redesdale, defeat a royal army at the Battle of Edgecote.
And Edward IV himself.
Is caught completely off guard, captured. Warwick gets his hands on the king.
And takes immediate revenge on the Woodvilles.
Swift and brutal. Earl Rivers, the queen's father, and her brother John Woodville captured and executed without trial. Warwick has Edward imprisoned in Warwick Castle, then later Middleham.
So he's done it. He has the king. He's running the country. Or is he?
Well, that was the plan. But it turns out ruling with a captive king who doesn't want to cooperate is difficult.
How so?
England descends into chaos. Law and order breaks down. Without the king's willing authority, government just doesn't function. Warwick can't control the country.
So he has to let Edward go.
He's forced to. Within about 2 months, September 1469, he has to release Edward. His first attempt at ruling from behind the throne failed.
Which pushes him to even more extreme measures. If he can't control Edward IV, maybe he needs a different king altogether.
Exactly. Leads to the next phase. Full defection, and the plan to restore Henry VI. After another failed rebellion attempt in 1470, the Lincolnshire Rebellion, or
The Suskert Field.
right, but that fails. Warwick and Clarence are declared traitors, and they flee to France.
And who's waiting for them there?
King Louis XI, the master manipulator. He sees a golden opportunity to mess with Edward V.
By brokering a deal between Warwick and Margaret of Anjou, Henry VI's queen.
The most unlikely alliance imaginable. Think about it. Margaret hates Warwick. He deposed her husband, killed her supporters. Warwick despises the Lancastrians. He fought them his whole adult life.
How on earth did Louis XI make that happen?
Pure realpolitik. In a marriage alliance again, Warwick agrees to marry his younger daughter, Anne Neville,
Wait, Anne Neville, she later marries Richard III, right?
the very same. But first, Warwick marries her off to the Lancastrian heir, Edward, Prince of Wales, Margaret, and Henry VI's son.
So Warwick sacrifices his other daughter to seal this deal with his former archenemy. Incredible.
It sealed the alliance. Warwick now had the Lancastrian claim to legitimize his actions.
And the invasion plan works this time.
Spectacularly well, initially. Warwick lands in England in September 1470. And then comes a crucial moment.
His brother, John Neville, Montague.
Yes. Montague had been loyal to Edward IV, but felt Edward hadn't rewarded him properly, specifically, hadn't restored his earldom of Northumberland, which had been given back to the Percys.
So he defects, switches sides to support Warwick.
He does. Brings his troops over. Edward IV suddenly finds himself trapped, his support collapsing. He has no choice but to flee.
Where does he go?
To Flanders, part of the Duchy of Burgundy. His brother-in-law, Charles the Bold, is Duke there.
And back in England.
Henry VI is broken out of the Tower of London and put back on the throne. The readeption, they call it. Warwick is now the lieutenant of the realm, the real power behind the throne. Kingmaker Mark II seems successful.
Seems successful, but it doesn't last long, does it?
Barely 6 months. International politics bites back. Charles the Bold of Burgundy isn't happy about this Lancastrian restoration backed by his enemy, France.
So he helps Edward IV?
Gives him money, ships, mercenaries, enough for Edward to launch a counter-invasion. He lands back in Yorkshire in March 1471.
And then comes the final, fatal betrayal for Warwick.
George, Duke of Clarence, Warwick's own son-in-law.
Why did Clarence switch sides again?
Ambition and self-preservation. Under the new Lancastrian setup, with Anne Neville married to the Prince of Wales, Clarence realized his claim to the throne through his wife Isabel, Warwick's other daughter, was suddenly worthless, maybe even dangerous.
The Lancastrian heir was now ahead of him.
Exactly. So he calculates that his best bet is back with his brother Edward IV. He defects, taking his troops with him.
A massive blow to Warwick just before the decisive battle.
Devastating. It weakened Warwick critically just as Edward was marching south.
And the two armies finally meet at Barnet, April 14th, 1471.
Yes.
And the battle is famous for one thing above all: fog. Thick fog.
Apparently incredibly thick morning fog. Total confusion on the battlefield. Visibility was near zero.
Leading to friendly fire.
Tragically, yes. One crucial Lancastrian contingent mistook the badge of another Lancastrian group for Edward V's son badge and attacked them. The Lancastrian line just collapsed into chaos and panic.
He and Warwick.
Trying to get away as the battle turned against him, but he was pulled from his horse, surrounded and killed, cut down while trying to escape.
And Edward V made sure everyone knew he was dead.
Absolutely. Warwick was so popular, rumors of his survival could have sparked more rebellions. So Edward had Warwick's body, and that of his brother Montague, who also died at Barnet, brought to London.
And put on public display.
Stripped naked and displayed in St. Paul's Cathedral for 3 days. A brutal but effective way to prove the Kingmaker was truly gone.
A very dramatic end. Okay, let's talk aftermath and legacy. His death didn't quite end the instability, did it? Because of that massive inheritance.
No, the fighting continued briefly. The final Lancastrian hope died at the Battle of Tewkesbury a few weeks later in May 1471. Prince Edward was killed. Henry VI died, or was killed, in the Tower shortly after. Edward IV was finally secure.
But Warwick left no sons. Just 2 daughters, Isabel and Anne. And that massive fortune.
Which had to be divided. And the fight over who got what poisoned the Yorkist regime for the next decade.
Because the husbands of the 2 daughters were
Edward IV's own 2 brothers, George, Duke of Clarence, married to Isabel, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the future Richard III, who moves quickly to marry the now widowed Anne Neville in 1472.
2 brothers fighting over the Kingmaker's lands. What were they actually fighting over?
All those incredibly valuable Beauchamp and Despencer lands, the source of that £7,000 a year. It was legally complex. How do you divide lands held through Anne when her sister Isabel's husband Clarence also had a claim?
A legal nightmare.
It led to years of bitter arguments. They reached a sort of partition agreement in 1474, but the resentment between Clarence and Richard simmered.
And eventually contributed to Clarence's downfall and execution in 1478.
Definitely a factor. Warwick's legacy, his sheer wealth, continued to cause trouble long after his death. It destabilized the very family he'd helped put on the throne.
It shows that fortune was just too big, maybe, for the system to absorb smoothly. Now, what about his reputation, that title Kingmaker? When did that actually start being used?
It's surprisingly late, actually. The first known use is in Latin, regum creator, around 1521.
Creator of kings.
Yeah. But Kingmaker in English really gets popularized by the historian David Hume in the 18th century, so it took a while to stick.
And how people have viewed him has changed dramatically over time, too.
Hugely. Depends entirely on the perspective of the writer and their era.
So, early on, soon after his death,
You get contradictory views. Some chronicles, like the popular Mirror for Magistrates, paint him sympathetically. The great popular hero, betrayed by an ungrateful king, Edward IV, loved by the common man.
but the official Yorkist line.
Totally negative. Sources commissioned by Edward IV, like the History of the Arrival Chronicle, depict him as purely driven by pride, ambition, arrogance, making and breaking kings just for his own ego.
And Shakespeare picks up that version.
Absolutely. Shakespeare's Warwick in the Henry VI plays is very much the proud, manipulative, overmighty subject. That cemented the negative image for centuries.
Then you get the Enlightenment historians, like Hume again. What was their take?
Hume and the Whig historians saw him differently again. For them, Warwick was the greatest, as well as the last, of those mighty barons who formally overawed the crown.
Meaning he was bad for progress.
Essentially, yes. From their perspective, focused on building a strong, centralized constitutional monarchy, Warwick was a problem. His power challenged the king, prevented strong central government. He was an obstacle to modernity in their view.
Judging him by 18th century standards, basically.
Exactly. Which is why more recent historians, people like Michael Higgs, A.J. Pollard, argue we need to judge him by the standards of his own time, the 15th century.
And by those standards,
They'd argue the slights he received from Edward IV, the secret marriage, the public humiliation, refusing the match for his daughter, were genuinely massive insults to someone of his standing. His international reputation was confirmed. He was treated almost as a prince abroad.
so his reaction wasn't just wounded pride, it was defending his legitimate status within the existing political system.
Precisely. When the king seemed to be deliberately favoring the upstart Woodvilles and undermining Warwick's established position, many contemporaries would have seen Warwick's opposition as understandable, maybe even justified. His popular support in 1469 suggests that.
But we come back to that core problem.
Yeah.
Even if Warwick felt justified, could Edward IV really tolerate a subject that powerful? With that much land, that much money, his own army in Calais?
Probably not. It was structurally impossible in the long run. Edward was trying to forge a stronger, more assertive monarchy where the king's authority was unquestioned. Warwick's very existence, deriving his power from inherited land, not royal favor, challenged that fundamentally.
So the clash was inevitable, regardless of the personalities.
You could argue that yes. For Edward III to truly rule, Warwick's independent power base had to be dismantled. It was a zero-sum game for the survival of the Yorkist monarchy, as Edward envisioned it.
It's interesting to get the foreign perspective, too. What did observers on the continent made of him?
Philippe de Comines, the Burgundian chronicler who knew the players involved, gives a fascinating assessment. He calls Warwick clever, shrewd, incredibly rich, recognizes his political skill.
What?
But Comines also notes two things. First, that Warwick was actually very hated by some factions, maybe people whose lands he controlled, or merchants hurt by his piracy, not universally popular then.
Okay.
And second, Comines thought Warwick wasn't personally as brave in battle as Edward IV was. He saw Edward as the more dashing military leader, so maybe Warwick was more the strategist, the power broker, than the frontline warrior.
A complex picture. Political genius, incredibly wealthy, popular, but also hated. Maybe not the bravest soldier.
Gives you that three-dimensional feel, doesn't it?
It really does. So, summing up this deep dive, it's an incredible story. Richard Neville takes these huge family inheritances, mostly gained through clever marriages, jure juris, and turns them into unmatched political and military power.
He proved that in 15th century England, massive personal wealth, especially when combined with control of something like the Calais garrison, could genuinely challenge and even dictate terms to the crown itself.
His power came from land consolidated over generations, not from the king's handouts.
And that made him fundamentally different and fundamentally dangerous to the type of monarchy Edward I was trying to build. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. We've seen how Warwick built his power on this almost unprecedented scale of inherited wealth. Was his eventual downfall at Barnet just bad luck in the fog, or political miscalculation? Or was it structurally unavoidable? Consider this. Was Richard Neville simply too rich, too powerful through his land inheritances, to survive in a kingdom moving towards a more centralized model? Could any king, ultimately, tolerate a subject whose authority wasn't granted by the crown, but rooted so deeply and independently in the soil of England itself?